Hello and welcome this July 9th, 2022, to the premiere live broadcast of Otherworld Global Radio and TV. I am your host, Sandra Sabatini. If it's your first time joining us, we want to welcome you. If you're a follower of Otherworld Global Radio and Otherworld Global TV, we say a warm welcome as well. Glad to have you with us. I tell you, I'm so excited to be back in the saddle, so to speak, and to be with you today. This is a interview that has been a long time coming, and we're so glad that you could join us today on your Saturday. I tell you, we are broadcasting live on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. If you happen to miss this, or you have some folks that want to watch this after our interview today, don't worry. You can just go on over to our portal at www.otherworldglobalnetwork.net. And we'll also be putting it out live for free on various different social media streams as well, and through various syndication streams. So today we're going to be discussing the Guardians of the Looking Glass, Project Looking Glass, and the future of humanity. I am so thrilled to introduce our upcoming guest here. We have with us Frank Jacob. He's an international award winning filmmaker, visual artist, musician, and composer. Having teamed up with the U.S. motion picture production company Screen Addiction, he currently focuses and explores the frontiers of consciousness on many different subjects. He has quite a few films out called Solar Revolution, The Klaus Dona Chronicles, and Packing for Mars. He's also a noted lecturer. He does presentations around the world. He takes the audience down deep into that rabbit hole, going over hidden history, trans shamanism, artificial intelligence, secret technology, human evolution, timelines, and parallel worlds. Without any further ado, Otherworld Global Radio and TV Podcast would like to welcome Frank Jacob to our show today. Frank, I am so thrilled to have you with us.
So good to be here. Thanks for having me, Sandra.
I tell you, it's been a long time coming. The last time that we were going to do our official premiere, we actually got taken out. And what I mean by that is that our network here, we broadcast actually in the Southwest here, and they took out probably about 4 different blocks, including the block where we're at, half of the city, to be quite honest with you, on the night that we were going to do the premiere with Mr. Jacob in regards to Project Looking Glass. So, very happy that he's agreed to be on the show today for our first show of the new year in 2022. Frank, thank you so much for your patience and your understanding. In regards to the subject at hand, I tell you, you know, there is so much that you have been involved in, and right off the bat, let's just ask the first question: how in the world did you get connected to this whole Guardians of the Looking Glass?
Well, I wasn't expecting it. I've done I've done research on the Looking Glass years earlier, obviously because of the work that we do with film. I got to know Project Camelot, Carrie Cassidy, Bill Ryan. They were obviously some of the key figures in breaking those storylines many years ago. And over the years, that video kept popping up with Carrie's interview of one of the people that was, claiming to be part of was called in to work on the project. And, I wouldn't really, in a year earlier, I'd done kind of a broadcast with my biophysicist scientist friend in Germany, Dieter Burrs, on timelines and quantum physics and what it means, time travel, things like that. But I wasn't really planning on, anything to do with the Looking Glass Guardians. I just happened to be actually researching a totally different subject, and I was on someone's Telegram channel looking for some videos that they were referencing in one of their talks. And as I was scrolling down, tons and tons and tons, you know how it is on Telegram. It's just too much going on. So I happened all of a sudden just stop on this little one of these messages, and it said Looking Glass. I'm like, Looking Glass, that has nothing to do here. What's that got to do with this, right? So, so I clicked on it just for the hell of it, and I landed on this YouTube channel of a group calling themselves the Guardian of the not Galaxies, that's a good one too, but the Guardian of the Looking Glass. And they had there was like, I don't know, maybe 65 clicks on a couple of videos, nothing much going on. But I decided to click on some of the videos, and I just, one of them was called Singularity, and one of them was talking about Event One. And so it got my curiosity, and little did I know what I was walking into, but the messages that they were talking about were really fascinating, because for me right away, knowing something about Looking Glass, and I hadn't heard anything about it for years, I became curious, and I got this kind of goosebumpy feeling that this might be real. There might be something to this. And so I explored it, and basically I wrote an article about it, figuring, if this is real, we need to do something and get the message out, because the message was all about getting it out to be talked about, because it was all about talking it out into the open. It was kind of like dealing with the idea of timeline wars in a way, and the other side being in charge of their certain technologies. The only thing that we could do, the people, is to kind of alert everyone to what these plans might be. So that's what I did. I broke this story, and then a few hours later, John Nolan from Inspired Channel reached out to me, and we connected, and he said, "Hey, we should do an interview, and sounds interesting." And I said, "Sure," not knowing what I was walking into still, because I don't spend a lot of time really online on shows and things like that, like researching shows and stuff. So I didn't really know the extent to which Inspired Channel had an audience. And little did I know that a few hours after our interview, we had like 25,000, 35,000, 50,000. Then it was after a couple of days, it was already over 100,000 views, and it just exploded and went viral. And
Well, I tell you real quick, just to quickly interject, Frank. I found out about you through the Project Avalon forum over there. I seen your article; it blew up. It blew up. So, I would also tell our listeners and viewers around the world, if you get a chance, going over to Bill over at Project Avalon and check that out. I'm sure it's over there in the archives, and you'll see how much it did blow up. But going right back to what you were talking about with the over on the Inspire channel, I had a chance to check out a couple of those videos as well of you over there as well. And you're right. It completely blew up over there. And now it's this phenomenon that has just kind of developed a mind of its own, so to speak, out here, in the public forum where everyone and anyone is talking about it. I just want to say too, we're bringing this forward today because I really don't have an opinion on Project Looking Glass. I'm kind of stepping back a little bit, kind of looking at it, and I'm at that standpoint of what really is behind this, who are the folks behind it, and that's something too that you also brought up, Frank.
well, yeah, that's always been, of course, when you find something like this, the only connection you have to it is through, first of all, the information that's coming out at you, which you can read. You can scan it from your own personal level of like emotional and spiritual evolution and development. You can kind of see, does this resonate, does this not resonate? And or if they allow you to contact them. In this case, they actually did have an email address. I went and looked up their email address, and I wrote them, and we had a few exchanges. So there was some interaction before they, of course, then went for completely silent. And so the whole thing became, kind of well, I mean, of course, the messages were not necessarily the kind of messages that people want to hear. And the other problem was that there was the other main character that, well, even though he wasn't the main character, the real main character of the Project Looking Glass material is Dan Burish. But Dan Burish did a few lengthy interviews with Bill and Carrie, and then kind of went off the radar as well. And this other guy came into the scene called Bill Wood, and he did an interview with Carrie, and that interview is still circulating. And that's the one that most people kind of they resonate with it, let's just say, and they gravitate to it. First of all, because it's out there, and second of all, because he brings across a message that's kind of like, hopium. as they call it, right? It's like,
Right.
oh, there's going to be this event, and the event is going to happen, and the event is the waking up of humanity, right? And so there's so many people out there in the world right now that are into the new age stuff, and
Right.
all ufology crosses over into it. It's become a massive thing, right? So branching off into, but it's basically this awakening movement, this spirituality movement on the internet. And so his message resonated with those people because it was confirming what a lot of people are feeling, and that is there's this quantum evolutionary leap that people have predicted. Ancient cultures, Maya, Hopi, have talked about it. And so the Looking Glass Guardians, their message was a little bit more controversial, because they were saying there is an event coming, but they were pushing the event much later. We should say that the event Bill Wood, in this case, was talking about was December 21st, 2012.
Mhm.
And that was the one showstopper event that came and went,
Right.
and nothing that what people were expecting happened. Now, something did happen. Things did happen and begin to happen at that point. In fact, even earlier, actually in July. But, that event, the way people had visualized it happening, didn't happen. So, then it turns out Bill Wood isn't actually Bill Wood, but Bill Brockbrader. And he
Right.
turns out he's a wanted man because he's been involved in relationships with a minor. He went to court. He had to rescind all of his testimony. And everyone said, okay, look, another fraud, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's those people that believe that, okay, well, that's exactly what the cabal does. They sort of pin you with some crime, and then you're gone, right? They don't have to kill you. They can just disrepute you. And then when your reputation is shot, so is your message.
That's right.
But the thing that I felt that the Guardians, who then appeared 10 years later, hit the mark with, for me personally, and which is why I wrote about it, was because of what I knew a little bit about timelines and my own spiritual work, is that it just doesn't happen on its own. You have to work at your spiritual development. But I knew that there was a cosmic event that's happening, that's standing before us. Nobody can really put a stopwatch on it, because these things they're not really predictable to the day and date. But the time frame that the Guardians of the Looking Glass were mentioning was much more realistic to me because of what we had found out in the course of Packing from Mars. Because we had talked to a Italian journalist, Luca Scantamburlo, who'd been in touch with a whistleblower from the Vatican, who had been leaking inside information about the Vatican's secret space program that was talking about a celestial event, a coming cosmic event, whose timing was amazingly right around that time, 2030.
Mm-hmm.
So that gave a lot more credibility for me. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is that they talked about it being a probability thing. It wasn't guaranteed that we were going to have this evolutionary leap. In fact, they were talking about a consensus timeline, a split that could happen. But if the people don't themselves begin to wake up and actually create or visualize what this new Earth timeline would look like, then those who are in charge of the Looking Glass material had found out from their work that no matter what they did, it always worked out in their favor, which was moving us toward the artificial intelligence transhumanist timeline. And if you take a look around in the world right now, it's very clear that we are not, the predominant timeline that's manifested in that you could say is the consensus that the majority are following, is that transhumanist timeline. I mean, society is being systematically, stage by stage, broken down into these subjects that include, lack of gender, lack of political, affiliation, lack of bound borders any longer. It's just one world, one thing. It was like this. And the only people that are really talking about that in an organized fashion, that are putting loads of money, have technology and the media on their side, is the Klaus Schwab gang, as I like to call them, the World Economic Forum, and those people, right?
Emperor Schwab. Emperor Schwab. I tell you, he wants everyone to eat bug jaw. That's his whole thing.
He's only Kissinger's little bitch, right? So let's be clear.
Indeed.
He's not the man in charge, but he's the
Indeed.
man with the face in the public, and he's the man everyone is like, Ursula von der Leyen, the German leader of the European Forum, she's like, she's happy to get on her knees and zip them down if she has to. It's looking at, you can see it on her face. It's disgusting, right? And these people have their allegiances pledged to this foreign private entity. And again, we have the situation like we have with the World Banks and stuff. It's a private corporation, private run, and our governments have enslaved us to this, vested interest of powerful people. And that's the problem. This is what the Looking Glass Guardians were pointing out. And I love that, because it was ass kicking. It was hard. It was edgy, right? I was like, finally, a message that's willing to look at reality in the eye and try to do something about it. Not just like, oh yeah, we're all good.
And get the people involved.
Yeah,
and get the
exactly.
people involved to
Get
where
the
they're not
people involved.
sitting on the sidelines, that they can make a difference in their future. That's what really resonated with me, Frank, is the fact that the empowering message of how a person can actually insert a vector into this timeline to create a whole different reality, and enough people getting behind what they wanted to put out to the public. Um, the result, and this is something we could talk about, is an event that was supposed to happen in New York City that didn't exactly happen. If you want to tell the folks a little bit about that.
Well, the event that I saw when I landed on their YouTube channel was called the Event 1, and they were talking about a date of April 18th, and that there was a false flag operation that had been planned, where there was going to be a bombing in Times Square, and this was going to set in motion a whole series of events, and leading to essentially all-out warfare in its ultimate completion. It was going to go through a series of stages. The way they described it, it was going to lead to a volleying. First of all, it was going to lead to a blame game, which, of course, the obvious blame person is Putin, because what's happening right now, and this is what made it even more interesting, is right there at that time we were at the early days of this whole Ukraine conflict. And so the idea of the Americans blaming Putin in order to launch a military attack, a strike, a nuclear strike if necessary, seemed all too viable, right? So that was the first part of the thing. And then this was going to create a series of interactions that were going to keep escalating, leading to this really like dystopian future somewhere down the road. And the Looking Glass Guardians were describing a series of 70 events that were going to keep happening if this event happened. And the idea was to stop this event, and that would change the trajectory. And we would, with each one of these events that we stopped, that they were going to leak out there to the public, we would change these timeline odds. And they had numbers to it. They said the timeline for the transhumanists, the negative timeline, as they called it, had the odds at 95.1% of success. We had 4.9% of success. Of course, that seems kind of depressing, but when you think about it, light versus dark, it doesn't take a lot of light to make a dark room lit up, so 5% still was, and even the Looking Glass Guardians were saying this, they'd seen the success, so they knew that it was enough, but they knew that they had to get it out there at that point to stop it. And so when the days were coming up to the 18th, we had over here, I'd been, because I mentioned to you the biophysicist that I've been working with in Germany, Dieter Breurs, we decided to do a show ourselves in German on the subject, because we figured, look, we need to talk about this topic because it's so kind of, people tend to gravitate toward the negative part of it. There was a very lengthy description of these gruesome events that were going to start happening. And there's this thought out there in the spiritual community that if you just thinking about something makes it happen. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And now that may happen in terms of when we're functioning at higher dimensional levels. Yes, we can think about something and we can manifest it. But things down in our level of reality work a little bit more on a slow motion basis. You don't just think it and there it is. And the other thing is, thinking about it alone isn't going to change it. If you're isn't going to make it happen. If you're thinking about it in terms of observational level of analysis, That isn't going to, it only happens when you stick emotion into it and you keep thinking and keep thinking. But we knew, and then the other thing that the Guardians of the Looking Glass talked about was the positive, event. So, but it was because it had been preceded by all this dark stuff. It was almost like an afterthought. So people gravitated toward the dark stuff. So Dieter and I were like, we got to talk about this in terms of consciousness. We have to talk about it in terms of, human evolution and what timelines mean and how that interacts with us on a spiritual level, so that we can steer the conversation into the higher levels of discussion rather than get bogged down into this dark stuff.
Absolutely.
And I think that's kind of what resonated with people. And so leading up to the days, we were even getting remote viewers involved that he had been working with, really high level people that work for government projects and things like that. And we wanted them to look at this. And they at first refused because they thought it was a hoax. And then all of a sudden, as days went on, the people in these groups were getting hits that, no, there might be something to this. You better have a look. And they began looking. So we started getting diagrams, and they were seeing something happen in a window. And then we're coming up to a week before the event, and all of a sudden, a weird thing happened. There were these strange smoke bombs and shootings that happened in the subway in New York.
That's right.
And then they found later, which they didn't publicize, but it came out later, that there were bombs that had been planted. They just didn't trigger. So it had been averted. Then the event came on the 18th. Trump released some weird letter to the mayor about not paying attention to potential terrorist activity in the city and being irresponsible doing that. And then we had a remote viewer tell us that they actually intercepted a van at 2 p.m. and stopped it from going off. And of course, we know that nothing happened. And so I think because by then we'd have probably had already over 1 million people with what I was taught with, John Nolan and I were had done a couple of shows. And so I think probably close to between 500,000 and 1 million, or at least we're probably talking about it. So we surely, I think, kiboshed their plans. And so once that happens, you realize that, if it's actually something that these negative forces, the cabal, had intended on setting things in motion for their realization of their timeline, they were, of course, pissed. And it changed the trajectory of the timeline that we're all on. And so everything's kind of out the window now because we've changed that. There are other events that were supposed to happen. There was a second event dealing with a quantum computing scientist called Winston Wu, Dr. Winston Wu.
Yes. Let's talk about Dr. Wu. Let's talk about Dr. Wu. I mean, he was the crypto genius, right? That he developed, was it Raindrop DAO? Let's talk a little bit about that and about how his is how he's involved in all this Guardian Looking Glass stuff.
Well, the Guardians had seen his name come up in the Looking Glass data that they had, and they knew that he was going to be instrumental in his work. On the one hand, generating huge amounts of money for helping, sort of on a grassroots level, take on the cabal in in our normal reality, in the physical dimension. And at the same time, because of his skills as a quantum scientist, he was going to be instrumental in hacking what's the facility in Switzerland called CERN. And that facility is well known for being a facility which is involved in smashing particles together to create black holes or even time travel experiments. And the Looking Glass Guardians had talked about the CERN facilities being also instrumental in assisting the dark cabal toward realizing and manifesting their timeline. So his work with quantum computing was going to throw that, like he was going to hack their system, and it was going to change and ruin their experiments and change their system. So he also on his website outlined a whole series of points like that, philosophical points, as well as, strategic ideas that he was thinking about doing. And it was all, going to try and use cryptocurrency to be able to just generate the money to be able to empower people on the physical sense that we need money if we want to take these people on. I mean, most of these politicians, you can't even run for president, sadly, in America, unless you really have deep pockets these days. Or if you don't have deep pockets, you're going to be coming up against those who do, and those who do have the deep pockets can cover the ads and pay the expenses that they have, and basically buy their way into, like, an astroturf their way into success, as they
So that's
say.
what really put him on the cabal's,
Right.
line of sight right there. They wanted to take him
Exactly.
out because of what he
And
could
he was
do for the
supposed to go
world.
out on the 20th of May. They were going to kill him. And of course, everyone was wondering. So the 20th of May approached, and we were watching, and I was watching, and so what happened is that there'd been some weird stuff that had happened. He started mentioning that they'd been contacted by this group, the Looking Glass
Mhm,
Guardians.
mhm.
And then over the course of weeks, I guess they began more communications and more exchange of data. And so they somehow averted his attempted assassination on the 20th of May. But there was some cryptic messages coming out from one of the admins on their Facebook page, and on his Facebook page, and on their Telegram channel, and on their forum, about how there had been a skirmish, there had been some shootings, there had even been someone had been shot, but that Wu had survived and he was fine and he was continuing the work. And that went on for probably another, I think, 10 days or something, 12 days, I think, I'm not exact, but somewhere in that area, a couple of weeks. And then they finally, it's like they caught on to where they were, because they'd realized that the crypto team that they were putting together became infiltrated by members from the World Economic Forum, and that Klaus Schwab personally had made it his personal mission to take out Dr. Wu. And one of the last messages we got before they went black, their sites went down, was that some of the members of the quantum computing team were going to alert him about some of the fact that they thought they were on their way to try and find him or capture him. And when they got
Right.
to the compound where he was hiding, it was surrounded by military, so they couldn't get to him, and that was the end of it. So it looks like they apprehended him, and we haven't heard a word from him since. So obviously we're hoping that it didn't result in the ending of his
Mm.
life. But it certainly resulted in the end of Raindrop Dow, much to the frustration. And of course, there was, a lot of
Right.
negativity and attacks, even on me personally, that I was the cause of people that had invested and had lost had lost their crypto wallets
Oh
and stuff.
my.
And I always made it clear, and so did John, I wasn't pitching
Okay.
his Raindrop Dow, and neither were the Looking Glass Guardians. They were just talking about him. They weren't saying, and by the way, you should go out and invest everything you have in crypto, and I think people that are in crypto should also realize it's a risk game. You could lose everything overnight anyway. So that whole argument seemed kind of weak to me. I can see how people are frustrated if they invested some of their crypto and lost it, but that's kind of what happened. So then, I guess what I was telling you earlier, Sandra, is that for me
Yeah.
was interesting, is that if they really were just a crypto scam, then it would have been like, okay, job done. We got our crypto. Let's get out of here. We won. You lost, right? But no, they came back. They came back with another video.
Right.
And then they came back with yet another video. And their new videos were now moving into new territory. They were sort of approaching it on terms of their videos had been deleted, we should mention, or they had deleted them. I'm not sure. Nobody really knows. But the only video that was left on their channels was this weird third one that was talking about amulets and things that nobody could really quite understand, that third one ever. But the
Yeah.
fourth one and the fifth one began talking about coming events that are just going to be very apocalyptic, and that they were going to go to lengths that they were going to pull out all stops, and they could no longer communicate those plans with the open community via their channels, because the videos would be ripped down right away. So the only way to actually get the message out was to go directly to the people, have the people send them their email address, and then they would be notified via email, with direct downloads, and then be able to spread the message wide scale. Which,
But
if you think it through, it's logical. You want to go out, you got to go out on the grassroots level.
I tell you what, we do have the video here for folks to be able to see. Frank, I'm going to go ahead and cue that up so folks can go ahead and see that. Let's go ahead and see what the Guardians had just put out.
Guardian important update. As you know, we spoke about an evil plan we were aware of in our last video. We also discussed how CERN has had an impact on the timelines we are facing. Many of us felt despondent and hopeless, and that nothing could be done to stop what is coming. That has changed. It is not because of anything we did. It is because brave people outside of us trusted that our guardians, that you, could help them in a very important way. For the past month, we have been working with two groups of patriots who plan to release newly discovered information. They contacted us and asked us for help. These patriot groups do not have a wide audience or prominent social media accounts. Instead, they operate in the shadows and behind the scenes. They are comprised of many ex-military and ex-government intelligence officials who came together over the years out of concern that the US government had been compromised and no longer operated according to the law or constitution. Some members of the patriot groups personally knew some of the individuals who belonged to our group, so there was already a level of trust that we shared. We examined the information that they brought to us, and we then verified it with our own sources. We determined without any doubt or question, the information is legitimate and of great importance. The information is of the highest worldwide secrecy. It is the closest guarded secret of the negative forces. The information was first discovered, by accident, by a group of white hat hackers who were working for a European government agency. They were very concerned with what they had found. They are bound to secrecy under threat of penalty of lifetime imprisonment or death. To release this information would require many steps, a great deal of courage, and the ability to find the right people to help them. Through a series of events, they made contact with various whistleblower groups, which led them to the patriot groups we are now working with. The patriot groups offered assurances to the white hat hackers that the information would be released properly, without censorship, and with great protections offered to keep their identities secret. After many negotiations, the white hat hackers agreed to begin working with these groups for a plan to release the information. The patriot groups felt our people, our guardians, could be the best people to help get this information out, and we agreed with that. We then formulated a careful plan to release it. The information is of such critical nature that we must release it in the most effective way possible. We have been told if we release it, or if the patriot groups release it, it could cause a worldwide internet shutdown. This is so that teams of professionals working for the negative forces can quickly remove it. The shutdown would be similar to an internet outage that took place in which Facebook was down for a period of time in 2021. A cover story was quickly released at the time, but this occurred because a similar release of information happened, and it was quickly censored. We not only believe the negative forces would shut down the internet if certain information got out, we know they have done it before and have the capability to do it. This is why a mass release across many channels and networks must be done all at once at the same time, so that censoring it would be near impossible or very difficult. The Facebook breach was not done this way. It was done via a series of posts which were quickly deleted, and the whistleblowers were quickly identified. The threat was terminated by the negative forces. We must act in the most deliberate, careful, intentional way to ensure what we release cannot be stopped, shut down or censored. We have now received hundreds of emails from guardians at our new email address. We believe those who wrote us are prepared to act when they are called upon. Soon, you will receive an email from us with instructions. It will contain links to videos that will be posted online by the patriot groups we are working with. You must act to share those videos across as many social media accounts as possible. You must also copy those videos, save them to your hard drive, and re-upload to different channels in case the original source videos are deleted. We also believe Telegram is a critically important source of truth, free from most censorship. It will act as an important conduit when the information is released. What will be released will be an interview with an individual who is acting as the liaison between the white hat hackers and the patriot groups. This individual has an extensive background in counter-surveillance and espionage, and an intricate knowledge of the negative forces' coming plans. This individual will communicate everything provided from the white hat hackers. The video may also include screenshots and documentation detailing what has been discovered. Additional videos will also be released later on. We cannot disclose at this time the exact nature of what will be revealed. What we can say is it involves an event that is to take place sometime in the near future. Our best information is that this event could occur in as early as 6 months from now, and no later than the year 2025. We do not believe the event can be changed or stopped, as so much work has gone into its plan. What we do believe is that there is another way for us to challenge what is going to happen. We have a plan of our own, one that will be carefully revealed when the time is right. It is a plan that can only work if we, the patriot groups, and our guardians, work together. You will receive an email from us sometime in the month of July as we prepare for this disclosure. We will post a video on our channels shortly after the emails are sent so that you can be aware and ready to take action. We want to thank the patriot groups who contacted us and thank the white hat hackers who are risking their lives. They both believe the guardians, those who emailed us, will be the key to getting this information out to the world. They believe in you. We told them they made a good decision. We also warned them that there are agents and agitators who will try to attack and discredit us. First, they will try to censor the information. If that does not work, they will try to block or ignore that information so that it remains circulating within a small group of people. If that does not work, and if the information becomes more widespread, this is when they will use paid agents and agitators to try to discredit it. The campaign to discredit and attack will intensify if the information continues to be spread to a wider audience. This is how they operate, step by step, so we are prepared for their response. If you consider yourself a guardian, or you want to be one, email us at the following address and await our email so you can be ready to take action.
There you go. Now, this is the newest message from the Guardians of the Looking Glass. Frank, let's take that step by step there. What are your thoughts on that?
To that they've introduced some new terminology like patriots, and a lot of people are, of course, have remnant memories of another group that was using those terminologies called the Q phenomenon or the QAnons. So there's this thought in the back of your mind that is this another Q? Is this another? And I believe that Q is kind of a psyop, but that's just my opinion. Other people believe there's a lot of credibility to it. Nonetheless, it was the same kind of thing. There was a lot of good, you could say, that came out of the fact that the Q movement caused people to begin questioning the narrative of the mainstream media, and it woke a lot of people up. And the only negative downside to a Q thing was that it didn't pan out too much, and it didn't really, cause any major change in the world around us. In fact, you could say now that Trump is gone, there's been a ricochet, a pendulum effect in the other direction, so that the leftist liberal media and the whole censorship issue and the whole mainstream media has even accelerated the plans that were there before Trump was even elected the last cycle. So, that was the one thing that was a consideration. But if you break it down to the message itself, it's very clear that when you have this kind of information, the other side definitely does not want this information to get out there, because it's of such a level that it is going to topple and change, like such, so many plans, like they mentioned. They've been working at this a long time. They don't think that it's going to be stopped. Well, I mean, anybody that's a critical player inside, it has to be an insider of some kind, that releases that information is putting their lives in danger. And the idea of putting that information out there, I mean, it's probably not going to be long before the AI systems that they have in place right now are going to trace the source of the wherever the data has been stored, whatever servers it's sitting on. So it's going to have to be something which can happen quickly. And then once it's out there, it'll probably be stopped very quickly, and it'll be left to whoever was able to get that data and download it and put it out there to get it out, if they even did. So there's still a lot of ifs here. Like, they may not even get the data to us. They may not even get the emails back to us, because they're on a fine line between, like, they have to tell the people what they're doing, and they have to get people involved. And yet at the same time, if they don't talk about it, how are we supposed to find out about it? And the only way we can right now is we have the internet, which is what the internet was made for. It was made for this public discourse, this way of crowd, sourcing and just getting things out. Like, I think the idea is brilliant. And I really do hope that that they pull it off. I mean, when I listen to it again now, I still get this feeling that there's something to it. It's not just It's not just some scam. I mean, it's just too well thought. And because, as you know, I did this webinar, in the webinar, I just broke down the entire Looking Glass history, and I incorporated all this new information. And once I looked at all those blocks, I realized, oh my God, like there's so many sync points here that I just couldn't accept the idea that it would just be some, like what a lot of people were saying after Dr. Wu disappeared or Raindrop Dow disappeared, that it was a crypto scam, because these people seem to have information about things that you don't really, I mean, you don't have, the normal people don't have access to this information. And they were talking about things that a lot of people just don't know about, unless they're just total geeks, totally into this, all these sync points.
Well, let's reveal a little bit of something here today on this show. Before all the information was sanitized in regards to Dr. Wu, he was actually talking about being contacted from some kind of AI. But this AI had stated that it was from the future. So now we have time travel involved in the Looking Glass, physical time travel. We have this AI involved, and this AI wanting to know the names of certain people that were a part of the Dow project that Dr. Wu was doing as well. So anything in regards to that article, we posted it actually on Otherworld Global Network on our Facebook, our Facebook group, and through our Telegram and through our other social media connected sites. And if you go and try to find anything in regards to Dr. Wu, you won't find nothing. Absolutely nothing about Dr. Wu. It's been completely taken off the web. You can't find not one thing about Dr. Wu. That says something to me. Let's talk a little bit about A Tale of Two Timelines.
Well, I called it A Tale of Two Timelines because this is kind of what we're dealing with right now in all of humanity. We've got we're reaching kind of a tipping point where we're coming up on something which is going to be decisive in terms of what direction humanity is going to go in. We're at this point where we have the technological advancement that is being talked about and already being developed in labs, and is so far advanced that we've introduced the element of an artificial intelligence with what they call sentient awareness into society. So we're talking about, they're trying to merge organic humans, us. We are biological organic beings. We're not hooked up to anything with wires. We are hooked up to dimensions through frequency, but we're, as far as the difference being that people that are artificial, like robots, are within 3D. They don't access or tap into other dimensions or other frequencies that we do. Like, we're creator beings, and the artificial intelligence is a being that was created by us within a limited bubble of reality. It'll never exceed that bubble. It'll always be in that container. Whereas we aren't in a container, but we just don't talk about this much. Science tends to put things out there in terms of it's just a grand accident, that we're all just rocks and molecules and atoms. Everything's been an accidental universe. So they remove all the aspects of sentience in terms of soul and spirit from science and try to reduce us to just being an accident of what they call nature. So they believe since it's in their power to emulate nature, and that they've gotten to the point where they've created this artificial form of carrier that is powerful enough to go on par with the human intelligence. They believe that the next level of our evolution is immortality in these synthesized physical containers. So they want to slice up our brains, translate them into code, and deposit them on a hard drive and stick them in some sexy looking robot that's going to look like humans or whatever, and then live like forever in this happy virtual world that they've created. And, if we do nothing to interfere with that right now, the plans are so far along, that timeline is so developed that we're probably going to end up having to enter that reality to be able to compete. They're talking about what they call the useless class already. Yuval Harari, one of their sort of prophets of the new age in the World Economic Forum circles, is talking about data being the future, that basically it's all just data. And that, you know, the humans that are now still out there that are not hooked up to any, like the way a computer is to the network, the matrix, are going to be left on the outside, and they're going to probably vanish. So, you know, Sandra, the reality of the situation is that what you're looking at right now around you on the streets, the people that you see around you that are alive right now, that could be the last generation of organic, biological humans left. I mean, you got to put that through your mind for a second, right?
Right.
You know, that could be it for us, folks. You know, 20 years, one generation. They're talking about less than 20 years of perfecting this, what they call the singularity, you know, the event horizon, where they reach that point. And a couple of weeks ago, Google shocked everybody, or I mean, one of the employees at Google, I should say, shocked the world when he brought an attorney in on the request of the artificial intelligence that they're working at with Google, and you know, had them contract the attorney's services to represent them as a legal entity. Okay, this is unprecedented. This has never happened. So the first step publicly has already happened, if not already, you know, in the Black Ops projects. Like, you know, we know, having made Packing for Mars and talking to some of the whistleblowers, that our level of technology in the open and the public domain is about 50 to 100 years, if not more, behind the actual level of technology that we're working on. Really, you know, so, but the public disclosure of a AI that's now been hired an attorney to be represented is another level for us, even publicly. So the two timelines we're talking about is, you know, this artificial transhumanist timeline, or the fact that we as human beings have these dormant capabilities inherent in our DNA, locked away in what people call the junk DNA, if you will. Right. And that there are, you know, we've moved into an area of the universe where we are being stimulated by increased levels of frequency and particles and radiation that has to do with our position on the galactic plane. And it seems to be similar to what the Mayas called the Hunab-ku, this ray from the center of the galaxy. And indeed, this is something that we actually have been reading and measuring, which is going on right now and has been increasing since, there's that date, 2012, you know, since 2012, we've been kind of entering into this window where this is increasing and affecting us. And these frequencies affect certain specific organs in our body. One of them is the pineal gland. The pineal gland is like called the third eye. Probably people know it as that for no, you know, for a specific reason. It's because it has the capability through its physical function of releasing certain chemicals into our body to induce higher states of consciousness, which in our film Solar Revolution, Rick Strassman did a experiment with a bunch of volunteers that took DMT, dimethyltryptamine, because dimethyltryptamine is that chemical, one of those chemicals that the pineal gland manufactures to put us into those altered states. And when in those altered states, we have these, you know, extrasensory experiences. And Rick Strassman's experiment was a way to document what these people that were voluntarily taking DMT were seeing and experiencing. So what the Looking Glass Guardians were talking about with this singularity event has to do also with this cosmic event. Some people call it the solar flash. And, you know, in the Tale of Two Timelines, I go into a lot of the science behind if there really is evidence that such a flash or such an event could happen, when it could happen, you know, and has it happened before? And so it's clear to us that when you research that material, what becomes apparent is that, yes, there's the transhumanist timeline on the one hand, the people developing all the technological aspect of it. But on the other hand, it seems to be like the universe has cosmically orchestrated all the ingredients necessary for us to actually be stimulated into induced higher states of consciousness, if you will. And the only thing missing is a public discourse on it. If people were hearing about it, you know, if the schools, if the science teachers were telling the students about this other form of, potential enlightenment, of these other forms of consciousness that are induced through frequency states. We know about the 8 hertz frequency, for example, being the frequency of sort of the delta state, where we have, where we're really calm and we're sort of in a quasi sleep state. And in those states, they've done research and they've just determined that the 8 hertz frequency is the frequency which our brain resonates at. That also is the frequency the Schumann resonances resonate at. So meaning that when two different objects are in proximity resonating, they go into coherence. And so the Schumann resonances may actually be a kind of depository or repository, an archive of the entire human history that is out there for us to actually tap into. So we have the actual mechanism to make that evolutionary leap. And the only thing, like I said, that we're not doing is really talking about it enough, and which is why I felt it was so important to put that webinar together, because it needs to be explained to people that, yes, it looks pretty dire in terms of the transhumanist timeline. If you look at all the details, and we do that, we look down to the hardcore details of it, and the philosophy behind it, and where that thought comes from. And we also look at the other side and the philosophy behind it, and what the technology, the organic, biological technology and the mechanism would be that would lead us to the other timeline. So the timeline split is in front of us. The only question is, which one are we going to manifest?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm all for the positive timeline. It brings up more questions, and folks should be asking themselves, why is the cabal pushing as hard as they are right now? Why are the lockdowns? Why is the jab? What's in the jab? Think about it. Think about these questions. Is there something in that jab? Is it going to, well, I'll tell you what. Won't you watch Frank's class here, A Tale of Two Timelines? Let me go ahead and put this up on the screen here, Frank, so folks can check this out.
Well, thanks for putting that up there. I didn't actually anticipate you were going to do that. I just think that, it is something that is years of research condensed into kind of like a day-long seminar. So you really get into all of it. You get into the whole looking glass history. You get into how the technology works, and who's behind it, what their intentions were. And it goes into like kind of how did we land on this timeline to begin with. I think that's an important aspect that many people don't often talk about. Like they always talk about, for example, the Q movement always talked about how the media is manipulated and controlled by the cabal, and opinions are shaped, and people are guided and pushed into certain thought forms and certain ideas, but they only go back to a certain point. But in the webinar, I show you that it goes back a lot further than to the point where most people they go to 1945 and then everything before 1945 seems to be real, and everything after 1945 is where the manipulation started. And they like to make up this story about how there were these evil Nazis that were brought over with Project Paperclip, and they've developed these fantastic stories. They've woven this really incredible web about how these old Germans somehow managed to come over and basically usurp the American government and do all these plans toward the Dark Fleet and stuff. But it's not based on anything real. If you go back and you look at real history, you realize that Paperclip had a lot more to do with the fact that the Americans, when they went in and bombed basically Germany back into the Middle Ages, stole the entire patent archive of everything ever invented by the brilliant Germans and brought it back to America, and didn't bother paying any royalties, of course, but they didn't know how to decipher it. So what do? They need people to be able to decipher it. Who are they going to get for that? Germans, German physicists, German scientists, right? So they had to bring them over. Of course, but it's amazing because when you go into the Majestic material, you realize that the Majestic group was intended to actually do several things. One of them was to, yes, recoup and discover crafts that began crashing in the United States starting in the late 40s, and try to reverse engineer that technology for the advantage for their military advantage. And at the same time, they also had a specific active program that was intended to impregnate the budding UFO community out there that was obviously always witnessing these craft that were appearing in the atmosphere and the skies around the United States as well. And they needed to infiltrate that with a lot of false information. And because the human imagination is so creative, it didn't take long. It's been like, 80 years or whatever, 70, 80 years. And a lot of these fantasy stories that were implanted by general twinning, for example, have mushroomed into giant ecosystems of stories that basically have no foundation in reality. But because people don't have a really fundamental understanding of real history and what led up to the whole 20th century and what happened in the 20th century to bring us toward the timeline, because we're on the timeline now that was shaped, you could say, for the most part, are honed and refined in the 20th century. Now they're just picking the fruit. They're ready to execute, and that's why there's this acceleration. And, at the same time, the same people that are doing this realize that consciousness is evolving, that not all of us are dumb. Not all of us are buying it. And we're starting to organize and we're starting to talk, just like you and I are doing, and like I do with John Nolan. And we're realizing, wait a minute, the emperor is wearing no clothes, people. And so we're tearing down their facade. And they know that it's only a matter of time before we pull the entire, scaffolding down and we see it, for what it is. And they have to move fast. They have to move faster. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they pushed their event a week earlier from April 18th, and it didn't work out so well for them. Mm-hmm. But they're not going to go away. You got to realize these people have been working with looking glass technology, which means they saw a lot of things coming and they saw a lot of options. So they've probably seen these options as well, but nothing ever is written in stone, because essentially we are what is described as being frequency anchors, that our consciousness anchors into this particular dimension, this frequency that we're living in. It anchors ideas and thoughts. And the more of us that are, actively focusing on this potential evolutionary leap that we have before us, the more the probabilities of it actually happening become solidified. And, I think that what people really do need to realize is that you can't, like, we have free will, so we also have the free will to screw it up, which means there's not going to be a savior, which is going to come. Sorry, folks. Even Jesus said that if you depends what particular translation of the gospel that you want to look at. Like in the Greek translation, he says, I'm a son of God. But in the King James Bible, it says, I am the son of God. And those two, that one word, a or the, makes all the difference in the world to what people do, to whether they allow themselves to be disempowered by thinking there's going to be a savior, he's going to come. But I mean, even Jesus was a revolutionary. He was toppling the tables over. He was shouting out there what was going on. He was calling the emperor out as wearing no clothes. Back then, he was just stuck 2,000 years in the past. Imagine that. But the thing is, it's up to us. We have to do the work. We can't wait for the savior to come. No one's going to show up. The aliens aren't going to come. People say the aliens stopped the atomic. They're going to stop the war. Did they stop Hiroshima? Did they stop Nagasaki? Or did they stop the thousands of atomic tests that took place under the oceans or in the desert or in the sky, up in the atmosphere? They didn't stop those. Why wouldn't they have stopped them if they're so dangerous, and if they're going to have an effect on their universe? Yes, they do have an effect, but they're tied in with us. I think the only time that they're going to come in and do anything is if we actually, or if those people operating this technology, weaponize it to the point where they're going to actually threaten their civilization. And then they would probably have to step in defensively, because if they don't, then those people that are here, that are operating this technology, that are probably not as spiritually wise as these others are, that are standing and watching us, if they are out there, are going to take them down. And they're not going to let that happen. But that's a big difference between intervening and interfering and causing our civilization to have this advanced boost in consciousness. I don't think they can do that. They have to allow free will to take its form. And we have to trust that the cosmos, this cosmic event, which has been predicted is going to be what happens, and which is going to be the trigger event of our potential cosmic awakening, our quantum evolutionary leap. But even that, as I've learned from the material, which you'll see in Tale of Two Timelines, we actually can affect whether this cataclysmic event will take us to the full dimension of a pole shift, where the Earth actually shifts, and you can imagine the masses of water and the volcanoes and the destruction that'll take place, right? Which is actually what has taken place in another timeline, which is the one that we haven't even talked about that yet, but the J-Rods,
Yeah,
the P-2s and the P-45s, right? The future humans that they found actually being the ones that are piloting those ships that began appearing in the 40s were us from the future that were here right before this coming event, because of what happened last time. It's hard to get your mind around it. It's pretty crazy, but time isn't linear in the sense like that we think. It's time is like, it's relative to our consciousness and what we move through these dimensions personally, and time has no relation in a linear sense. So it's possible that future people can come back to our time and that we can go back into the past. These things are all possible once we have a better understanding of time, like David Anderson, for example, like you had on your show.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We can talk a little bit about Mr. Anderson if you'd like. Actually, he had put out a video on time control technologies, and if you go over to andersoninstitute.com, you can check it out over there as well. He also has a patent that he put out for a time reactor. You guys hearing this? A time reactor. We actually put it out on otherworldglobalnetwork.net for you to be able to check that out over in our Otherworld Global Network blog section, where you can actually review that patent. That too has been taken off the internet. It's going to be very hard for you to find it, but you can find it on our website still, crossing our fingers. Hopefully we won't be taken down over this, but you can actually check that out as well. And, Dr. Anderson talked about 10 different ways that you can actually do time control access. Let me show you guys something real quick, and we can kind of talk a little bit about it, Frank, if you'd like. Let's see here. Let me find it. And yes, we are live. Of course. Of course, it's eluding me right now as I'm trying to find it as we are live.
While you're
Go
looking
ahead,
for
Frank.
it, I'll talk a little bit about the P-45. One of the elements that we didn't talk about was that these pilots of these craft that began to surface or appear in the 40s turned out to be future humans. And future humans of two particular factions. One of them were from 45,000 years in the future, and one of them were from 52,000 years in the future. And they were called P-52 J-Rods and P-45 J-Rods, respectively. And the P-45 J-Rods were the descendants of our present-day Illuminati. And they were here actually to ensure that the reason they look like the grays with the big buggy eyes is because of what happens when this cataclysm takes place. It sets in motion a whole series of evolutionary steps that lead to first originally them needing to go underground, and then thousands of years later eventually leaving planet Earth, going to the moon, Mars, and then ending up on Reticulum. And then now basically coming back to this time because they, as a result of their exposure to space radiation and things like that, they mutated and their bodies began to deform, and which is why the grays don't look as beautiful and as proportional as we do now. And so they were here to try and harvest genetic material, which accounts for a lot of the abductions that are going on. And they were going to take this genetic material back to their timeline in the future. They didn't want to change the timeline. They're quite happy with it actually going the direction it goes in.
I don't know if you've seen that. But we just lost the stream there for a second. Let me go ahead and check the stream and see if we're still live. right after I put up Project Pegasus. Isn't that interesting? We are
Yeah.
live. We still got the bars. Go ahead, Frank. Go ahead.
I think you got to be careful what you put up on on the screen.
Obviously
These
so.
days it's getting crazy, man. It's really getting crazy.
Let's go for it.
Where was I? What did you last hear? I was talking about the P52J rods and the P45J rods.
That's right. Go ahead.
Well, and they have a lot to do with these timelines, and the P45s being the descendants of the Illuminati, who are here to actually harvest genetic material so that they can carry it back to their future. They are using the looking glass technology for navigational purposes, and the whole discovery of looking glass technology resulted from the Majestic 12 group's interaction with the captured J-rods, who then explained to them about they captured craft which had functional looking glass technology, and they were also led to sealed scrolls in the Middle East that had been deposited in the Sumerian culture and had been found and had building plans for these looking glass devices, which then were set up in various. I think you've got a drawing here on the screen on the bottom right, you can see it on the bottom. Those are particular schematics of this device. On the left, you can kind of see that it's been located in area S4 of area 51, and that's sort of the room-sized version. And Dan Burrish talks a lot about how it functions. But the way it works is they place these devices in the proximity of stargates. Stargates are like these vortex points that are naturally occurring all through on our planet and in space around us. These are all physical, actual, natural phenomenon, which are astrophysical phenomenon that are going on around us, that they've learned how to tap into by putting these devices in the proximity of them. They also have artificial stargates, which they use. And they have these looking glass devices, navigational devices on their ships to help them traverse so that they don't have to travel through time, through space. They can actually travel through these wormholes, which are opened by these stargates using this technology. So the P52s, however, are their 7,000-year-older descendants, and something seems to have happened to have caused them to develop kind of an empathic strain, an empathy for the human race now, which caused them to come back as well to try and kind of help us to make this evolutionary leap to avoid the cataclysm timeline that leads to their future and the future of the P45s. So it's all kind of connected. It's just really fascinating how all these elements are connected. The P45s are rogues, and they've aligned with the rogue factions of Black Ops projects operators of humans now, so the Illuminati of our current time, who are not adhering to any kind of treaties, who are using technology for their advantage to our detriment. And that's what we're up against. So that's what the timeline war is kind of about. It's this P52 faction of trying to awaken us, and the P45s trying to ensure their timeline exists and continues on and goes the direction that it ultimately goes in. The P52s work together with Dan Burrish and a few other MJ12 members to create something which they called the doctrine of convergent timeline paradox, which describes the paradoxes that happen as a result of them coming back here. And this doctrine is just full of incredibly potent descriptions of how we can, how our evolutionary process is going to be triggered. And when I looked at that doctrine again, and I compared it to some of the documents that have been emerging, with respect to quantum physics, and also Dieter and I had a little side project called Possible Futures, in which we analyzed messages that are coming through something called instrumental transcommunication, meaning interdimensional messages coming from other dimensions, messages coming to humans, even to inside of Faraday cages where they were picked up, voices or typed messages on a computer which came through as far back as 25 years ago, Sandra, right? Messages that if you read them now are speaking to us as if it's today. And if you read the messages that the P52J rods were giving us 30, 40, 50 years ago, they coincide and they match up totally to this. And as well, then again, tying in the Looking Glass Guardians, some of the intel that they were putting into their videos matched up again with the information that we were getting. So it was just too much. There was too many sync points for it to be ignored. So there really is this, like, there are these factions that are, Earth. There's an Earth faction. There's an Earth kind of time war, but there's also a space-based interaction with the time war. And there's also an interaction with interdimensional beings, which are talking about that they're about to, the veil between dimensions is about to be broken through, so that there's going to be this, unveiling of what's beyond I guess you could even say, the veil of death. So, because it's actually just transcending into another dimension. So this is some of the territory that you actually get into when you analyze and break down this material. And I'm pretty sure that David Anderson's, some of the material that David Anderson got a hold of or was given probably had its roots in the material that was brought to Earth by the J-Rods.
Well, I tell you what, he has actually, I put it on the screen for folks to be able to look at it here. He actually wrote an article in reference to time wars. And I'd highly suggest you folks looking at that, looking up who Dr. David Anderson is, who the Anderson Institute is. He was the first person to really come out and talk about time wars. We were very fortunate to have Mr. Anderson, Dr. Anderson, on Otherworld Global Radio. He actually premiered on our radio station. You can check out his interview at www.otherworldglobalnetwork.net. It's there for free. You can actually listen to it. He came on our show before he did Art Bell, in fact, for his Coast to Coast. And he talked about time wars, oh my gosh, years ago. And now you're hearing it in mainstream about time wars. You see here on the graphic up here, there are actually 10 different forms of time control access. He doesn't call it time travel, folks. He calls it time control access that you can actually check out. You can go over to his website at www.andersoninstitute.com. You can actually look at that graphic over there as well. But I think it's fantastic that you actually had him in your movie.
Yeah, we were fortunate to be able to include him in Packing for Mars, because Packing for Mars, of course, goes into some of this territory about time manipulation and time travel. And we needed to, we had people talking about time jumps that were going back on Earth between different locations and different times. And so it seemed a natural, logical conclusion to bring David Anderson's material in as well, because it's quite something to hear him talking in his very grounded, rational voice about these time manipulation technologies, and in particular the one that he was developing, that where they had these, like, containment chambers where they put plants, for example, in, and they could watch the plants grow right in front of their eyes, or revert back to seeds right in front of their eyes, go reverse in time. And the way he talks about how there's an international conglomerate of corporations that are working together on these time technologies, and something that most people can't even really get their minds around, because what do we learn? That there is no such thing as time travel, that it might happen. Stephen Hawking theorized about it, but never came out and said we actually really do have it. So one of the things you realize is that there's this level of physicists that are teaching the university grade level of physics. That's the sort of level of, like, we haven't figured out about time travel, we think it might be possible, blah blah blah. Space travel has to still happen with rockets, and then there's this other level of physics which is taking place behind closed doors in black ops and privately funded, which has light years beyond the physics that is being taught in the universities. And David Anderson's kind of a little taste a little, peek into the crack into the door of what's really, really going on in the world. So yeah, it was amazing to have him in the film.
You mentioned being able to see the experiment of the seedling. I actually hosted Dr. Anderson for a public event on Montauk, where he actually showed for the first time publicly that experiment of taking the seedling and being able to turn that back in time using a time reactor about the size of a soccer ball, I believe.
Yes.
And I tell you, Frank, I became extremely emotional because the application for this technology could revolutionize the medical industry, the world. If they're able to do that, just think about all the different applications that you could use that technology for the good for mankind. You know, um, but yeah, I have a feeling, folks, that we haven't seen the last of Dr. Anderson. I know that he's kind of went into seclusion for many good reasons, as you can hear here on today's show. Whether you be a Dr. Wu or a Dr. Anderson, there are folks that are out there that are determined for this information not to get out to the public. And as you can see, the public is ready for the information. The public is ready to receive the information. I know years ago we were talking about it here on Otherworld Global Network. Some of our colleagues as well, Project Camelot, and some of the other different media sources. It was just a novelty about time travel, time control technologies. But I will tell you, folks, from what I've been able to see, it's not a novelty. It's very real. Just like Frank and I here right now, it's super real. And I think that we're going to be finding out more in the future. As you can see from, J-Rod, about us visiting ourselves from the future. We could go into so many different directions right now, Frank. I know that we're a little bit over here, but maybe